middle because we did all this in lab. And you can see we have white matter around the periphery of the spinal cord, and then we have gray matter, which actually looks brown on this model, in the middle. The white matter is divided into columns or fununculi, and you have the anterior or ventral furunculus at the front, you have the lateral furunculus at the side, and at the back you have the posterior or dorsal furunculus. And different books use different words, so you can use whichever one you want. The gray matter, on the other hand, is divided into horns, where you have the anterior or ventral horn at the front, you have the lateral horn at the side, and you have the dorsal or posterior horn at the back. All good? The two sides of the spinal cord are connected, or two sides of gray matter are connected by this bridge called the gray commissure. So the gray commissure connects the two sides of the butterfly. And in the very middle, you have this little hole called the central canal. Now the spinal cord, like the brain, has hills and valleys. You're not going to be responsible for any but two. If you look at the front, you can see there's a very large insertion here, a big infolding at the front of the spinal cord, and that's called the anterior median fissure. So the anterior median fissure is at the front. At the opposite, on the back, you see a very small infolding, and the small infolding is called the posterior median sulcus. So anterior median fissure at front, posterior median sulcus at the back. Coming off of the spinal cord, we have all of these spinal nerve roots. At the back, you can see these yellow strings, which are the dorsal roots. And at the front, you can see these yellow strings that are the ventral roots. You might remember from class when we talked about it that we said the dorsal roots are afferent. Those are all the nerves coming in. And the ventral roots are going to be the motor or efferent nerves, bringing a signal out to the effector organ. If we follow the dorsal roots, we encounter this large swelling right here. And this big swelling is the dorsal root ganglia. A ganglia is a cluster of cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system. All of the afferent nerves coming into the dorsal root are unipolar neurons. They all have their cell bodies located right here. If we follow the dorsal root out, we see the dorsal root eventually splits. One part goes back, and the part going back is called the dorsal ramus. The other part goes forward, and the part coming forward is called the ventral ramus. The ventral ramus then bridges forward over this little extension here, called the ramus communicans, to contact this swelling here, which is called the sympathetic chain ganglia. When we talk about the autonomic nervous system, which will either be on Monday or Wednesday, we'll see the sympathetic chain ganglia is an interesting point of synapse between your autonomic nerves. All that's left to go through now is the maters. And we went through the meninges or maters in class, but to show them to you on the model, this yellow, fatty-looking stuff you see back here is our epidural space. This is outside the maters. You do an epidural, the needle would go into this yellow fatty tissue. That's what you'd be aiming for. The first white membrane you encounter, so the one my fingernail is touching right now, is the dura mater. So we see the dura mater right here. In the dura mater, you'll see a very thin brown line that I've got my fingernail wedged in. You see that little thin brown line wraps around underneath the dura mater? And that little thin brown line represents the subdural space. So the subdural space is very small. Right below the thin brown line, you can see more white tissue. So you have the dura mater, the subdural space, and more white. That white is the arachnoid mater. So you can see the dura mater and the arachnoid mater are literally butted up against one another. The space between them is very small. Below the arachnoid mater is a large space. I can wedge my baby finger into it. It's a big space down here. That's the subarachnoid space. And finally, the white actually on the surface of the spinal cord is the pia mater. So we have epidural space in the yellow, dura mater. The brown line is the subdural space. We then have the arachnoid mater. The big space is the subarachnoid space. And finally, the pia mater. So how does everyone feel about the spinal cord? That's all there is to that video.